Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching today here at Mid-Level U. Today we have with us Alex Fisher. She's a graduate of the Vanderbilt University School of Law and associate at Thompson Burton in Nashville, Tennessee. And Alex deals a lot with nurse practitioners and the legal space they fall into. She works a lot with the Board of Nursing, and so today she's here to talk to us about the legal space nurse practitioners fall into and sort of where we stand on a legal level, just to give us some insight into really how we're regulated as a profession. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who's in charge of nurse practitioners? Is it the Board of Nursing, the Board of Medicine? Who do we really work under when it comes to laws?
So that's a great question, and in a typical lawyer response, it depends. And it depends on what state you live in.
Okay.
So some states, nurse practitioners are regulated under the Board of Medical Examiners, so the same as physicians. And in other states, they're regulated under the Board of Nursing. And they might be under a specific kind of subcommittee just for nurse practitioners, or they might be under the General Board of Nursing, which is how nurse practitioners are regulated here in Tennessee. So that means that a nurse practitioner would be before a Board of Nursing, which has RNs, maybe LPNs, and nurse practitioners on that board.
Okay. So if you find yourself maybe in legal trouble as a nurse practitioner or under some sort of review, how does the way you're regulated or who's in charge of nurse practitioners for your state, how does that affect your practice or your sort of the legal ramifications that surround you as a nurse practitioner?
Well, in theory, it shouldn't matter because
Okay.
if the regulations are consistent, they should be applied consistently. But in reality, it matters a great deal because
Okay.
if you're regulated under a Board of Nursing, like here in Tennessee, that has maybe RNs or LPNs on the board who've never dealt with prescribing, and you're brought before that board on possible discipline for prescribing, you have individuals who are reviewing your behavior who have never prescribed and have never acted in the capacity that you as a healthcare provider act in every day.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I never would have thought that as a nurse practitioner, if I was brought before the Board of Nursing or some sort of disciplinary review board, that I would be evaluated by RNs, LPNs, because what I really do in my day-to-day practice is a little bit more of a physician. So it really kind of emphasizes this weird space and weird legal situation that we find ourselves in because our work is very different sometimes than the board that's regulating us. So very interesting to know. Can you give some examples of how you've really seen this disconnect in your practice at all?
The thing that I see most is kind of the ultimate question of who's responsible. So if a prescription is written or if there's a poor patient outcome, particularly in a state like Tennessee where you have a supervising physician and you have a notice and formulary on file, that question of who's responsible when the physician is regulated by the Board of Medical Examiners and the nurse practitioner is regulated by the Board of Nursing, they're kind of muddy waters between where the buck actually stops, whether it's with the nurse practitioner or with the supervising physician.
Okay. Well, and one thing that, I fall into thinking as a nurse practitioner myself, and I hear a lot from other nurse practitioners, is that in states where we have to have a supervising arrangement with a physician, like here in Tennessee, we kind of assume that, the MD, he's responsible for all my actions. He's signed off on the chart. If something goes wrong, it's not on me. Do you find that that's really true, or are we really responsible for our own actions as nurse practitioners?
You are exactly right. A nurse practitioner is responsible for their own actions,
Okay.
Particularly when it comes to prescribing. I like to use the analogy that writing your name on a prescription is like signing a contract. So whether your supervising physician told you to do it or another nurse practitioner told you it was okay, you're the one who signed that contract, and you need to have that documentation and justification to back up why you wrote that prescription.
Okay, great advice, great advice. Is there any other advice you can offer when you're structuring your collaborating or supervisory agreement with a physician? How should we make that look? Is there any clause we need to put in there to kind of protect ourselves or to make that relationship run more smoothly on a legal basis?
I think a helpful protection, especially for young nurse practitioners, is to have written protocol, which you should have anyway, but to really specify that written protocol of in what instances you need to check with your supervising physician before you write a prescription or when he needs to come back after you and check something additionally. I think that's really a good protection. And then to have that documented of, I talked to Dr. C, he said that this was acceptable, he recommended this course of medication. Though your name is still the one on the prescription, that just adds in a layer of protection that you've done your due diligence and that you've done everything to the best of your ability to show justification for the prescription you're writing.
Right, that's a good point. Well, and especially concerning new graduates and younger nurse practitioners, one thing that I commonly see is that people get frustrated because, yes, in their interview for the job, the physician said, "Oh, I'm going to be there on site with you all day. I'm going to help you see these patients. I'm going to teach you and train you." But then, you've got a full waiting room. You're both supposed to see 20, 30 patients a day. Those agreements get broken. They were based on a handshake. They weren't based on a legal contract. And so if you're a new nurse practitioner and you have that outlined in your supervision or your collaborative practice agreement, something you can point back to and say, "Hey, we really agreed to this, and not only did we agree to it, but if something goes wrong, we are held legally to it." And so that really gives you some weight behind that agreement, something to point to in the future. It really can make your job run more smoothly and ensure that you actually get that sort of mentoring relationship that you're really looking for as a younger NP who's newer to your practice, maybe doesn't understand everything that you'd hope to understand. So I think that's really important, great advice for younger nurse practitioners. Anything else that nurse practitioners need to be aware of?
Well, something I like to tell my clients or people I talk to is that you might not have the best rapport with your supervising physician. So just make sure that you have a physician or maybe an older nurse practitioner who you feel comfortable going to with any question you might have. The most important thing is to ask questions while you're still developing that sense of judgment. Right. And I've seen young nurse practitioners, adopt a new patient or take on a new patient from another provider and continue them on a regime of controlled substances because they assume the other provider was prescribing correctly. And just to make sure that you have someone you can call and say, "I got a new patient. They're on these 4 narcotics. Is this appropriate?" And someone you trust who can say, "No way, take them off it," instead of just assuming that what another provider did is the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. Ultimately, you're responsible for your own actions. You have to answer for what you do yourself. And so just getting that support system behind you, I know for me that was very important and something I recommend to everybody else as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Alex. Alex lives and works here in Nashville, Tennessee. She's an associate at Thompson Burton and is happy to help nurse practitioners across the country. If you run into any questions when it comes to prescribing or any other really legal issue in your nurse practitioner career, she'd love to help. Just send her an email and she'll get back to you. So thank you so much for watching today. We hope you learned something, and Alex again is available to help.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.